Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. We want to welcome. Apologies. We want to welcome everyone once again to the 15th Annual National Black Writers Conference. My name is Kel Spencer. I am the program director for the Role program of the Center for Black Literature, and I will be your host this afternoon. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get into our next panel discussion. We want to remind everyone to visit the marketplace and support our vendors. Sisters Uptown and Just Us Books bookstores are in the lobby on the Event Titans website, as well as the Center for Black Literature website. We also have a commemorative program journal on the Center for Black Literature website under the National Black Writers Conference tab on the menu bar, NBWC tab on the menu bar. We'd like for you all to fill out the evaluation that will pop up at the end of this session. And our donor button is on the Event Titans page, as well as the Center for Black Literature website. Without further ado, we are moving into our next roundtable discussion, the playwright and screenwriter as activists. And with what's going on in culture, I think discussing activists in its many shapes and forms is rather apropos. This session will be moderated by ADESOLA OSAKALUMI, an award-winning actor, choreographer, singer, and dancer who has seen successes in film, television, and on Broadway. He was an original cast member and lead of the Tony Award-winning musical Fela. He also stars in the upcoming Tanya Pinkins film Red Pill and was in Ibrahim, an American Black Film Festival short finalist. I happen to have a small role in that film as well as Cycle, a Pan-African Film Festival short selection. ADESOLA co-founded the legendary Ghetto Original Productions dance company and co-directed Jam on the Groove, the first off-Broadway hip-hop theater production. It received a Drama Desk Award nomination for Best Choreography. Without further ado, your moderator, Ade Osakalumi.
Good afternoon. What's up, everyone? Good afternoon, and greetings. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Kel, good seeing you again. Welcome, everyone, to the 15th National Black Writers Conference. Today's panel, as Kel said, will be about the playwright and screenwriter as activists, and we will be addressing racial and social justice issues in both plays and film. I'm going to get right into it. We do not have a lot of time. I'm going to read the bio of our first panelist. His name is Keith Josef Adkins. Keith is a screenwriter and playwright. His TV credits include P-Valley on Stars, Netflix's Outer Banks, ABC's For the People, The Good Fight on CBS, and he's currently developing a TV project with J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot and Regina King's Royal Ties with Netflix. His feature horror script, The Night Man, is currently being shopped. Keith's Great Migration play, The West End, is scheduled to premiere in 2021 at Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park. His play, The People Before the Park, about Seneca Village, is scheduled for a 2021 production at the University of Iowa. He was recently commissioned by the Apollo Theater to help curate their inaugural season at their new Victoria Theater. Keith is also the recipient of the Helen Merrill Playwriting Award, Samuel French's Award for Impact and Activism in the Theater Community, as well as National Black Theater's Tear Spirit Award. He is also the artistic director of the New Black Fest, a 10-year-old theater organization committed to fostering insurgent voices from the African diaspora. Welcome, Keith. Good to have you.
Nice
All
to be
right.
here.
Next up, we have Ngozi Anyanwu. Ngozi is a playwright, actor, screenwriter, artist. Her education is University of California at San Diego, where she received an MFA in acting, and Point Park University, where she received her bachelor's degree. Playwriting. As a playwright, Good Grief, The Homecoming Queen, The Book of Lucy, and Nike or We Don't Need Another Hero. Good Grief, which is also on Kilroy's list of 2016, a semi-finalist for the Princess Grace Award, Princess Grace Humanitas Award, was produced at Center Theater Group in Los Angeles in the spring of 2017, which she also starred in, as well as an off-Broadway production in the fall of 2018 at the Vineyard Theater. Nike, which was on Kilroy's list of 2017, was recently workshopped at the New Black Fest in conjunction with the Lark and Strand Festival in conjunction with ACT and Space on Ryder Farm. The Homecoming Queen, Kilroy's List of 2017, and Aaliyah Ryan finalist, had its world premiere at the Atlantic Theater, which also had a sold-out run. Anyanwu has also received residencies from LCT3, Space on Ryder Farm, and the Gerasi Resident Artist Program, the New Harmony Project, New York Stage and Film, and Page 73. She's also commissioned with NYU, the Old Globe, the Atlantic Theater, and Two Rivers Theater. Welcome, Ngozi.
Thank you.
All right, and next up, we have Liza Jessie Peterson. Liza is an artivist. I love that word, artivist, an actress, playwright, author, and poet. Her critically acclaimed one-woman show, The Peculiar Patriot, is available on Audible and was nominated for a Drama Desk Award and is a recipient of the prestigious Art for Justice Fund grant. Liza performed The Peculiar Patriot in 35 prisons across the country and recently performed it at Angola State Penitentiary in Louisiana, which is currently in development for a documentary. Liza is author of All Day, A Year of Love and Survival, teaching incarcerated kids at Rikers Island, which is being developed for TV. She was also featured in Ava DuVernay's The 13th and was a consultant on Bill Moyer's documentary, Rikers, on PBS. Welcome, welcome, Liza.
Thank you.
All right, so we have all met. So I'm just gonna jump right in. I'm gonna start with a question for Liza. Your work gives voice to people whose voices are often muted or not heard at all. What put you on that path, and did you find support for The Peculiar Patriot initially from institutions or from just people you were sharing the work with?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. And I'm so great to be on this panel with Keith and Ngozi and you, amazing, amazing artists. So what put me on a path was my initial introduction into the prison industrial complex in 1998. I literally went in as a teaching artist just to teach poetry to incarcerated adolescent boys. And, you know, as we all have at some point done the teaching artist, you know, hop, you know, you go in, you teach for 2-3 weeks, and then, you know, you hop to another school, another class. And I had never been to jail or prison. And it was my first week there. A correctional officer, he said to me, he goes, "You don't know where you are, do you?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm at Rikers Island." He goes, "No," he said, "You're on a modern day plantation." And he pointed to the boys who were walking down the hallway. He said, "That's the new crop. They're the new cotton." And I had never heard that language before. I had never heard the metaphor of prison being, you know, equated with slavery. Again, this is in 1998. So this is before Michelle Alexander's seminal book, The New Jim Crow. This is before it became a national conversation. It was not in the zeitgeist. So he goes, "Yeah, when you go home, put prison industrial complex into the computer, see what you find. And when I see you tomorrow, we'll have a conversation about it." And he literally boot kicked me down the rabbit hole of all this information, all these draconian statistics. And so it literally lit a fire in me, and I became like an evangelist. So when I came back to class the next day to the boys, you know, I was just, I mean, it was, the poetry class was just on fire because I was giving them information. As I was learning, I was teaching them, you know, along the way, all this information about this much bigger system that they were embroiled in. And so that started my descent down that rabbit hole of mass incarceration, and eventually it gave birth to The Peculiar Patriot. And when I wrote it, theaters were not trying to welcome it. They did not welcome it. I actually had 2 artistic directors tell me that it was going to scare their white patrons. And so that's why I wound up performing it at prisons and did a prison tour, because it was kind of, you know, I was so dejected because I wasn't getting any support. Again, this is like in 2003, so it was still early. People still weren't having this national conversation. So I leaned into the love, and the love happened to be in prison, oddly enough. And so that's why I wound up touring the play in prison, because that's where it was welcomed. And then fast forward to, I guess, like 2016, 17. Now it's in the national conversation. Now people are talking about it. So it's like, oh, we want to hear, we would like to read the Peculiar Patriot. And so, I mean, I welcome it, but when it first came out, it was really painful as an artist because, you want your work to be read, to be seen, to be produced, to be supported, and it wasn't at all. But it didn't stop me because I knew that the voices that I was reaching out to and speaking to, they needed to see me and I needed to see them. And it was a group of men at Eastern Correctional Facility, which is a maximum security prison in upstate New York. I was part of their writers group, and they helped me develop the early script for Peculiar Patriot. And they said, thank you for bringing it here to us, but you got to take it back on the outside because they need to hear this so that they don't forget that we're here. So they literally, the brothers at the, Harvest Moon Collective at Eastern Correctional, they gave me a mandate. They said, take that back outside and go with it. And that's what I did.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I think you spoke, a few things in the answer that really stood out to me were just the activism component, how you had to continue to push it in spite of initial resistance. And I want to segue now to Ngozi because when I saw your email tag, Ngozi, I really liked it. And it says artist, African, radical, right? I'd like you to speak to that a little bit. And then to the second part of this question is moving forward, how has the climate, let's say within the last 4 years, if at all, changed your approach to your artistry, to your Africanness, to your radicalness in the work that you create?
That's interesting. It actually says artist, African, rascal, actually.
Rascal. Even better, rascal.
Sort of like African version for troublemaker.
Right.
I don't know that it's necessarily, the time that we're in has necessarily changed my art as much as it has actually made me feel like, oh, I think I'm actually on the right path. It's actually, I felt like the time that we're in is just, it's, the conversations that people are having now are conversations that have been happening since before I started writing, and because I've had the good fortune and the luck to kind of always surround myself with Black people since I moved to New York. And so I feel like a lot of people in different ways have always had their finger on the pulse of what it is that the collective needs of Black people. And some people divert from that or continue to that and they continue to be, popularized or not, but I feel like this time has actually just made me double down on why it is that I make art and why it is that I do it. And sometimes it's actually made me stop making it because it makes me go, is this for me or is this for everybody else? And sometimes it's okay for it to be for me. And, because I like to think that people are still feeling the same things that I'm feeling. And it's funny because I'm on this panel and I don't necessarily consider myself the definition of an activist, I suppose. I just don't know that I consider myself that, but I do sort of always think of Black people and my art and will this serve them? And what are the things that I'm feeling? And they have to be feeling this thing too. And so I just want to share it with them. That's an answer.
Okay, no, totally. That makes a lot of sense. And I think the fact that you do the work that you do, the creation of that work for me which is what makes you an activist, but that's just my own personal idea. Keith, I'm going to jump to you. I first became aware of your work a few years back with a piece that you wrote called The Abandoned, right? Your sci-fi piece. I'd love for you to talk about that because for me, in 2020, looking back, we're talking about survival. And it was a piece about survival and the challenge or the threat were aliens. So could you give us a little bit of backstory on that piece and then segue into if you were to make that piece fresh, new right now, November 14th, 2020, what if any changes would you make to address even further the racial issue, the social unrest issue, the LGBTQ issue that exists in our world today?
Right. Yeah, I think, The Abandoned came out of my own sort of love for the genre, the sci-fi horror genre. Growing up watching horror films, running to see the latest movie and all that, I was the front row dude. and having conversations with other people of color, other brothers and sisters, particularly Black people, about horror and sci-fi all the time. But what was happening, what I was actually viewing and seeing, there was an absence of Black people. And if they were in those stories or in those movies or television series, they were literally the best friend, like sort of like the traditional best friend that would be killed in the first 5 minutes, or the wide-eyed Black person cracking jokes when a monster is literally eating his ass off, like stuff like that. And I was just so exhausted with seeing that. And I wanted to see myself in that world, see Black people central to conversations. Because normally horror and sci-fi are political and social commentary about the world, about society, right? So they're not just random stories. And so I felt like that was like 2013, 14, when I initially started thinking about The Abandoned. There was a lot going on in the Black community socially and politically, like, for the last 300 years. And so I decided to do this project where I centered Black people, particularly Black men, because I felt like at that time, there was a lot of light on the expendability of the Black male body. And so what I wanted to do with The Abandoned was to sort of have a commentary on the expendability of the Black male body and Black person body, and also sort of pull apart what it means when Black people are sort of facing survival, and how we unpack each other and how we pull each other back or pull each other forward, right? So it was also for me sort of looking at it as a way to have a conversation, and also like a template of what to do in a crisis. And so I went to several different producers, sort of so-called Hollywood producers, and pitched them the idea, because for me it was a television series, and they all said there was no demographic for the story. And I was like, well, that's weird. And one guy, I think I won't name the production company, but
name him, call him out.
But I will say that, and it was the person of color that they were sending to talk to me, like it was that guy. And I said, well, that's really interesting, because the most people I hear talking about sci-fi and horror are Black and brown people. So I don't understand. But if that's what you say, if there's no demographic. So that was my sort of Liza was saying earlier, like my sanction to go out and do it myself. Yeah. And so that's why it happened the way it did. I collected the actors that I knew and put it together. I think, to answer your question about what it would look like now, I have written the feature version of that. It was a 15-minute short for a television series, but I have written the feature version of it. I still get pushback, even from my agents, about the story, and they keep saying that it's you're having an intellectual conversation. I'm like, yo, I have seen horror films where it ain't about nothing. Like, are you for real? Like, so, but I think, to answer that question about like what it would look like now, I think that it would not change much. I think, the conversation and the posture and the stance of the Black community has pretty much been the same as far as our desire for equity and our pushback against racism for the last 300 plus years. And I can go through my genealogy and point out all the people for the last 300 years who were actively participating in equity and comeuppance and all that. So I don't know if it would change much, except maybe there would just be more viewers, because people are sort of like, biting on the popularity of Black expendability,
Right. I think that's a really great answer. And, we as a people are not a monolith, and let's say it is in fact an intellectual conversation. What's the problem with that? So
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I want to segue, and this is an open-ended question. Feel free to jump in for everyone, but I feel we've touched on, but I want to take a little deeper dive. What are your thoughts on the seeming gold rush to produce, to promote topics that are focusing on racial and social justice issues? Because I feel most of us would say that, like you just said, this is not anything new for Black and brown people, but it seems like the world has had a veil pulled away from their eyes, and now they're saying, oh, these things happen. How do you feel? Do you feel this is genuine? Do you feel it would affect lasting change? Do you feel it's a moment in time and then things will revert and go even further back on the opposite end of the spectrum? Feel free to jump in.
I'll say really quickly, like, I feel like what I'm now sort of languaging as white expendability, I feel like white people are sensing their own expendability and erasure in a very aggressive way. I think they've always felt that way just because, you know, there's the existence of Black and brown people in the country who have been colonized and enslaved. So that's always, you know, they're always looking over their shoulder for that reason, sort of rhetoric, like, you know, sort of metaphorically and for real. And so I think that we are at a place where we being Black people in particular have to continue and up our game as far as what it is that we really want from this country, and get really clear about what it is that we really want from this country and how we want to participate in this country. And I'm not saying like set the country on fire and, you know, start all over, which, you know, we may not have to do that because climate change is doing that for us. But I think there is some, you know, there's some strategies that really need to be sort of like unpacked as far as what we want. And I think I'm often confused about what it is we actually do want collectively from this country. So I'll start with saying that.
Yeah, because that gold rush is tricky because, you know, there are plenty of wonderful, talented Black artists and writers, you know, who are saying all array of different things. But, you know, some of the messaging is kind of like, ooh, this is what we're producing, you know, and I don't even mean like quality. I just mean like, what's the message? What it like, you know, it's kind of like we are getting some of us are, not everyone, some people are getting the opportunities of like, oh, great, we would like your voice. Come in, say what you want to say. And I'm like, that's what you want to say? Like, that's what we're doing. And so I think with the gold, that sort of like, you know, the gold rush, I get a little worried where it's just going to be like, you know, because it's still the gold rush on what white people who are in charge want. Like, it's still based on that. It's not based off of like, oh, now Black people are in charge and we're sort of having, but I do think that we are having this conversation, but we're not sort of like presidents of networks, right? And even if we are presidents of networks, we don't all have the same goal. We're still trying to push a bottom capitalistic line. So for me, I'm not sure where it all goes because it's still for the sake of entertainment. And just because, you know, it looks like us doesn't mean it's for us.
Absolutely, yeah. I totally agree. I think, you know, this gold rush. Listen, I don't care if it's authentic or not authentic. If there's a crack in the door, you kick it. I have to watch my language. You kick it open, right? And you get in where you can fit in. And so, you know, there's been such a long, you know, I guess, you know, they've had a head start with, you know, white mediocrity, and there's still white mediocrity. I'm okay with the Black mediocrity coming in, and, you know, we're working it out, you know, so we're building the ship as we cross the ocean. So to your point, Ngozi, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. It's like, and so there is a lot of messaging that I'm not cool with. I don't like, it doesn't speak to me, but I'm still rooting for us being in the room, figuring it out, you know, because we're playing catch up in terms of being in those spaces and having our voices explored, and actually for the first time having an opportunity to create narratives without the white gaze. Not that those, you know, narratives don't get pushback and still, you know, have to navigate through those spaces of the white gaze. It does, but then you get those kernels, those gems that just kind of come through. You're like, yes. So we might have to go through, you know, a sea of some mediocrity on different, you know, levels, but then you get those kernels that come through and you're like, okay, here we go. Let's keep pushing. Come on, get in the room by any means necessary. So, you know, I think the responsibility really is on us to, you know, keep our standard up and not just say, oh, because the door is open, you know, anybody come in. Yeah, everybody come in, but we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard just because they say come in, do the work.
Right. Yeah. And I would just want to add, like, there is the other level of what I call like white expendability. Like, I have a lot of producers pitching to me Black content, right? So like, because they've seen success in Black content by Black content creators, they want to just replicate that because there is a fear of their erasure and their sort of like position of supremacy and entitlement And so what I'm watching too, like for Netflix example, in the last week, I've seen at least 4 different movies and or series, movies in particular, that are Black, like populated by Black actors and sort of seemingly about Black people, like a Black story, but at the end of the day, it's actually written by a white person, right? And I can name a couple of horror films that have just come out in the last couple of weeks that everyone's like, oh my God. And I was like, oh, that's cool and everything. You do realize that was written by a white dude. They just cast it with Black people. So again, like just sort of pulling from what Liza's saying as well, it's like we have to be really, really strategic about empowering our own content creators. So we then just sort of flood the industry and flood the theater spaces with our stories from our authority and our authenticity, because we are in a battle with white content creators wanting to compete with Blacks, like being able to tell Black story themselves.
Right.
Yeah, that is all of those answers are so spot on. I want to use that as a transition to Liza. You said about kicking in the door, wave in the fort, right? That kind of feeling of getting in. Do you feel, because you have much more representation, it looks like, and I want you all to speak to this, in writers' rooms, you see theatrically, you see a lot of theater companies, Keith has a reaction to that, hold on. You see a lot of theater companies and institutions now are promoting diversity. You have, I think if I can, off the top of my head, 2 or 3 theaters recently have created new assistant or associate artistic director positions that people of color are filming. Do you feel that these changes, again, especially for the writer's room, because as you said, Keith, it could be a show that's populated by Black and people of color, but who is writing those words? Is that character going to sound and act authentically Black, continental, African, Caribbean, wherever they're from? Do you see a difference on that side in terms of the creation? Because I'm sure that Liza and Ngozi will soon, if they haven't already, and I just don't know about it, will be in writers' rooms, our potential showrunners and our content creators as well. What do you see that dialogue looking like now as things are beginning to shift? Or has it been a big shift for your experience?
I'm going to pass the mic to Keith, because he is, I mean, deep in that world of being in writers' rooms and seeing what the shift has been, from when he was there, from Girlfriends to now. I'm sure he's probably seen a lot and navigated a lot. So I'm going to pass the mic to the veteran.
Well, I mean, but Ngozi also has worked in a more recent writers' room, and I think that she can bear witness to some more recent activity. But I will say, I will pass I appreciate you handed the baton to me, and I'll pass it to Ngozi in just a second. But yeah, I feel like, when I was on Girlfriends right after grad school, just so if you sort of calculate my age, what I'm saying, I was just out of grad school when I was on Girlfriends.
Black don't crack, baby.
Don't matter. Don't
claim it.
Look at it. Don't matter.
But yeah, when I was on Girlfriends, there was a very, as you know, like at that time, it was UPN, it was CW. It was a very, very sort of small cluster of Black content being created by Black people, right? Girlfriends, 101, Half and Half, all those, Moesha. I think Eve had a show, all that was happening. But there were also, a lot of that was kind of being spearheaded by hip hop artists, whatever. So that was always kind of problematic. But the difference for me in the last 4 years that I've been back in television is that there has been like this sort of demand for equity and inclusion and sort of like the Black presence in the room. And I've also experienced a lot of pushback, even though like the mandate is to put a Black or brown person in this room or some marginalized person. But then there is pushback from, the white male particular showrunners and creators who are basically having to check off, like we got them, but do I have to listen to them? Because I have in my mind what I want Black to look like and how I want Black to sort of unfold in my story. And so I think there is an interesting sort of conflict and tension in these rooms where you have people who are smiling and happy that you're there because, one, they want to be part of inclusion and diversity, and also because they have to sort of check off that box. But there is a certain amount of pushback that is both spoken and unspoken. And that is very challenging for Black writers in particular and writers of color who are normally the only ones in that room, in those spaces, because you do have Black shows and all Black rooms, like, you know, the one that Ngozi was just on with HBO. But, you know, for the most part, most of us are in rooms by ourselves. And so we're having to come in and navigate that sort of political dynamic, but also like how to, you know, strategize so we can leave that room by the end of the day and have our peace of mind, because all kind of stuff from the N word to the B word, like, you know, people performing Blackness right in front of you, like white people performing what a Black person should sound like all of that is quite challenging just to get the story told. So I would just say that, that it has definitely evolved, but there is still resistance and pushback for us being in those spaces.
Ngozi?
Yeah, that's real. I mean, I sort of had like two experiences at the same time where I was developing a show, being paid to develop a pilot and to act in it. And then also was I was in the room for Americana, which was a Black female showrunner. So I had an African Black female showrunner who wanted a room full of Black, African, and women of color showrunners. So I was rather spoiled with that sort of choice, because Denai was really very incredibly intentional with, you know, adapting that book and knowing that we have all these different kind of voices. Even her, who was an African but not Nigerian, was like, I need Nigerians in the room. So she really had the foresight of actually like stacking the room in this very global way based on the story. So I was rather spoiled. So now that I'm now back in the interview room, and I'm approaching these rooms that are mostly white women and or white men. I'm, you know, 3 or 4, you know, showrunners, all white people. They're looking for one writer, you know, or 2 writers. And so I know that I am being interviewed because I am the, you know, the Black person or the person of color, and they just, you know, and so for me, it's funny, I actually find a place of power in that, because I'm like, oh, I know why I'm here. And because I was so spoiled with a really excellent voice first experience, that was like, say what you want to say, argue with me, you know what I mean? And to me, there's no one more powerful or intimidating than Denai Guerrero. So, you know, any white man or white woman, I was like, you can't scare me, you know what I'm saying? So these interviews, but at the same time, I may or may not get a job because, like, ooh, we don't want that kind of person. Like, we don't want someone that has, we were hoping she's going to be like the nice, smiley, quiet one from her picture. And so, you know, it's a twofold, but you have to really be who you are so that you can really just mentally sort of survive. And then I've developed, and it's interesting developing a show that is for you in your voice while people are trying to give you notes about you. Why do you do that? I'm like, I'm the only Black woman here. I'm the only woman here. And you're give me notes about structure. We can do that. You've done this more than I have, but you cannot give me notes about what a Black artist would do in this situation when you're an like, you know what I mean? And so there's just that other part where it's like, they want us, but they want us how they want us. And so there's just a lot of like pushing forward to just like maintain your integrity and maintain who you are. And eventually, if you don't become the creator yourself, which is what I'm working on, someone will say yes, right? But eventually you're just gonna, you know, I might just have to produce film and TV stuff myself because it's like, you know, that's the other.
I'm sorry.
No,
I was just gonna say this one last thing, like just listen to Ngozi. When I was working in the P-Valley room with Katori Hall, I saw firsthand her trying to make sure that her voice and her vision for the show that she was creating and the type of Black people that she wanted to create and curate, how the network and the studio were pushing back. And just like Ngozi was saying, they were challenging like what she wanted to do as opposed to her structure and things like that. Like I'm saying, like she was constantly like having to re-explain and sort of like, you know, like, look, this is what happens in Mississippi with Black people. Like, I don't have to keep having to answer that question for you. I understand that, like, trust me on that, you know? Yeah. And it's a battle. It's a battle just to sort of insist that we have the authority.
Right. There's sometimes where you might see weaker structure because someone is just fighting to get the story told. Yeah. And it's like, teach me how to slug the scene. Teach me how to like describe whatever. Like, I don't need to,
right.
don't know nothing about these people, but teach me like, oh great, when the camera's like, I'll learn that, but you can't tell me who I am.
Yeah.
You know? So.
You know what I'm really getting, and I think we all are in agreement, and most of the people probably watching this, there's the actual work, the actual, like you said, the technical side of all the technicalities, whether it's TV, film, theater, but then there's the mental work and the mental weight and the mental exercise and the mental slog to deal with everything that you have to deal with before you can get to do the work, which I think is one of the reasons why the work that's now being presented and created, most of it, the mediocrity notwithstanding, most of it is going to be strong because there's been such a groundswell of like being compressed. Pressure makes the diamonds, and all of the pressure that people have had to undergo to get to where they are. Like, I think it was Ngozi I was talking to, and he said, you know, if something gets on TV, we know how much of a challenge just for it to get there, to make that process. So that being said, we talked about TV. I want to talk about the theatrical world. Do you feel things are different as opposed to the theatrical world in terms of pushback, in terms of getting your voice heard, in terms of being in a room where you are really, really heard and your viewpoint is promoted rather than you having to defend it prior to it being promoted theatrically, because everyone here has an extensive theatrical background. Anyone and everyone.
Lisa, do you want to start?
Yeah. I mean, it's the same. It's the same sugar honey iced tea.
All right.
You know what I mean? You know, I think the difference is the slight you know, difference is that there are Black theater companies who and Black theater directors. So there are some other options. You know, and so, you know, like Ngozi was saying, you know, she was spoiled with her first, you know, being in the writer's room in the kind of writer's room that she was in. I was spoiled because, you know, my first play that was produced was at the National Black Theater. So I was spoiled, you know, but I did have, you know, my shows before that and my shows after that, and kind of navigating, you know, white theater world. It's still the same pushback, you know. It's like, okay, no, okay. You know, it's really interesting. But at National Black Theater, I had a lot of freedom. I had and a lot of support, and I didn't have to explain. I didn't have to explain myself. It was a common understanding because we spoke the same language, and we were coming from the same sensibility. But as far as, is it any different from my experience? No, not at all.
Okay.
You know, you're still submitting to you know, artistic directors, predominantly, you know, white, and they have to answer to their subscribers who are old and white. So they're, you know, they're developing work that is still has a filter of some kind of white gaze, that, you know, it can be Black, but not too black, you know?
Unless it's slave play.
Oh.
Trigger.
Yeah. Now you're trying to get me riled up. Stop.
No.
Trigger.
No, not at all. But as you were, you know, I had no intention coming into this to talk about slave play, but as you were talking about it, that's the first thing that my mind went to, because I know there was a lot of discussion. We don't need to go down that hole, but discussion about who that play was written for, although it was written by a Black playwright. So that's why it came to my mind, because I think it speaks to exactly the point that everyone has been making on the panel about what is work that is centered for us, on us, how does that relate to us? How does the playwright view their work? So, excuse me, that's why slave play came up. Not a trick question. We can continue on.
But I think, you know, to that point, it's very interesting that, you know, and as Black creators, when we're creating work from our voice, which is, you know, authentic, I would hope it's authentic, when they're white gatekeepers that embrace the work. Me, I have to interrogate myself first, because I'm always suspect of what voices white gatekeepers, what Black voices white gatekeepers lean into, feel comfortable with. So you'll have work that is by Black creatives, produced by white theaters and going through white gatekeepers, and it shows sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you look up and you get a white theater or white theater director who wants to take the risk and will give a playwright that freedom. But a lot of times it goes through that white gaze, and it shows. And Slave Play is just one example of that.
Right, and I would just like pull that thread and also say that just about the white gatekeepers, like I feel like there are Black playwrights, and we're talking about Blackness right now, so there are Black playwrights who organically are writing the way they write and telling the story that they're telling, and white institutions just happen to like that story, right? There are those playwrights who are just writing their experience or whatever it is that they're sort of observing in their world personally, and there are also Black playwrights who are writing for the Black gaze and writing for white gaze and white consumption, right? And so for me, and there's also Black gatekeepers who are also standing at the door of white institutions, who are also singling out like what Black playwrights and what Black theater practitioners they feel that the white institutions would prefer. And that's equally as problematic too. I mean, I'm saying what you're saying, but I just always think about also the Black gatekeepers, because what is their gain? What are you gaining from? I mean that's a rhetorical question, but
Yeah. We have not enough time, because we could do this all day. We could take a break, have a snack, but due to our the time constraints built into this platform and this our panel, I want to jump to some questions. We have about, I think we have 3, we have 4, and if we have more time after that, we'll continue. But I want to just make sure that the viewers and listeners out there are heard. This question is for Liza. It's from April Mojica. Liza, I know you've been doing your thing on the scene for a minute, but I missed out on that old world flow where one had to show up in person. I've missed your concerts and your shows. How can I tune into your content now in the virtual world and the virtual flow?
Thank you for asking that. Yeah, it's interesting. Theater people, we have to, in this age of the pandemic and with theater being shut down, transitioning to film, television, and digital platforms. So my work right now, all of my work is being digitized so that it can be seen on social media. I've got 2 film projects that are in development. One is being edited right now. So, on my website, on my Instagram is pretty much, that's my stage right now. It's crazy. My stage is Instagram and YouTube, Facebook Live. It's really bizarre, but I've had to make that shift given the sugar honey iced tea that we're in right now.
Absolutely. Okay, next question. This is for Ngozi. Ngozi, can you explain more about the capitalism as the problem for the screenwriter playwright of African descent? By Lupe. That question is from Lupe on Stolen Land.
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of it just has to do with, maintaining your integrity as an artist, and if you are worried about trying to get that money, right, trying to get that whatever, then a lot of people will compromise their art, right? And because people are really, at the end of the day, when it comes to the commercialism and film and TV, worried about the bottom line of it, sometimes the art can be diluted, sometimes, and that's a lot of and even what but keep talking about like white expendability, where white people will see that, oh, blackness is hot right now. Black oppression is hot right now. Oh, revolution is in right now. Great. Okay, they don't care about white people right now. They only care about black people. So now I can go ahead and be the head of this show and invite some black writers, and I can like splice in some black history and some Tulsa and some slavery and some whatever, because I've included some black people in it, but I still get to be in charge, and I still get to, you know, have the accolades. I still get to be the face of the TV show, right? And so that's sort of like how, you know, it works, because it's all about kind of like the bottom line. And then, you know, the beauty that I do love about social media, because it's made us more global, it's made us more connected. But it also has made us like clout chasers, because clout and, you know, like capital, you know, gives you opportunity. And so right now, everyone, like, oppression is building cultural capital. And there's something like really discerning and dangerous in that you get things for being more oppressed. And there's something right now that is like, that's really, I can't quite put my fingers on it, but there's something about that right now that feels really kind of dangerous and like just, you know, just not necessarily good. I don't need to see the terrible things I can unfortunately see that happen in real time on YouTube now put on TV again. Like, you know, like there's like this kind of cycle of trauma that is now becoming popularized, that I'm just like, I don't know what this is for, and I don't know that this is making us better. So that's kind of like, that feels like the danger of what's happening right now, as far as like capitalism using our trauma and being like, don't you want to see on TV? We're being relevant. See, are you niggas happy now? Like, there's something like that's also happening with that.
Right. Okay, great answer. I'm gonna jump to, okay, I'm gonna jump ahead. No, I'm gonna do it in order. I'm gonna go to Dion Bennett's question. Keith, take this. It says, please discuss how tokenism, even though we've kind of talked on it, only one-ism impacts content and the dynamics between Black art uses, especially in the relationship to the politics of gender and sexuality. What if the only one being chosen by white industry figures is the only male and or only straight and or only light-skinned, etc.? How do we change and challenge that land to get more seats at the table? That was by Dion Bennett.
Well, I will answer that by saying that, at least in the television film world, the Writers Guild of America has a Black Writers organization, a Black Writers Committee, and that committee for the last few years have been really, really adamant and strategic about making sure that these rooms staff or cast with more than one person of color, one Black person, right? So if you have a show that is being, you know, spearheaded by a white person, whether or not it's a show about Black people or Asian people or white people, that there's more than one in that room to sort of go against this idea that the one person in the room is the voice of all people, right? So the unfortunate thing is that when you do have one person in the room, which is most of the time, a lot of times those showrunners are hiring that person because of their own taste and their own palette. And often that person isn't going to be representative of all of these things that the questioner is asking about. Like, that person may not rep, you know, queer, you know, like all the things. Like, it may just be one thing because that room only wants that one thing, right? So for me, it's really up to the individual creator and writer and artist who ends up in that room, and what their mission is as a writer before that moment, right? Who they are in the world, why are they writing, what is their urgency, what is their objective, who they are as a person, like who are they writing for or writing about. So when they show up in these spaces, they can then sort of unleash the complexity of who we are. You can sort of, you may not be that person, you may not be a queer, dark-skinned man, but you can at least advocate for the complexity of our experience and that voice, so that way that can fuel the way any type of character is being curated or created in those spaces. So I think at the end of the day, it's really up to us as individual artists to just know ourselves and be honest with ourselves and really seek artistic journey that's about complexity and our humanity. So when we do show up in those spaces, we can bring that with us, while also there are organized movements, particularly I know also in the theater movement. I think there's this We See You White People movement, right, and many, many others that are challenging institutions about authenticity, presence, the number of people and all that in those rooms. So that is also happening, but we also need to be working individually by ourselves while that is also happening. So.
Okay, great answer. We have time, we have two more, so we have time for two more questions. This question, I'm going to leave it open to whomever would like to jump in, or if all of you would like to. It's from Gray Jones. The question reads, can whiteness, American white identity, exist without a predication on escaping Black mockery? If yes, then how can Black artists steer the racial shift in a way that better protects Black bodies while placing parameters on the conflict occurring within a changing white identity? We have some verbose and eloquent people writing questions today.
I need the Cliff Notes version of that question.
I mean, I think he touched on it, and I think that thing of like that white expendability is like that increasing white identity, right? It's them looking over their shoulder and seeing like, and them having to adjust of like, who are we? Who am I? But I think what Keith said as far as like the artist, the Black artist actually being in tune with who they are, why they do what they do, and like fortifying themselves no matter what room they walk into, you know, like, I think that's how you do the shift, you know, right? Like that's like how you maintain the shift, I think.
Okay, I like that. So now let's see. Okay, another question, which I was gonna ask, but someone wrote it and I'm gonna read it because they almost did it the exact same way I would have done it. It's from Afia Dawson. I'm not sure her brother, so this would be Afia. She writes, or they, your conversation reminds me of those I've had with my brother, Frank Dawson. No, not necessarily, sorry. He created and was a writer on He's the Mayor. It was on ABC decades ago. Who are your mentors?
Well, I will say that for me, I think about iconic Black people who I don't even know, but I've read and know of their existence. So I will start just naming folks who I see as like spiritual and creative sort of mentors: Toni Morrison, Sonia Sanchez, Haki Madhubuti, Leroy Jones, Larry Neal, the myriad of visual artists. I mean, like I can just continue. I think that, you know, there are also like people like Mara Brock Akil, you know, and I just want to be very clear, like, you know, sometimes there are, and I don't mean this about Mara in particular, but there are certain people who have made headway in the industry, whether or not it's theater or TV and film, who I may not necessarily like how they tell story, but I am equally as inspired by the fact that they are telling story and they are breaking barriers. And like what Lisa was saying originally in the conversation about just get through the door, let mediocrity happen. Not to say anybody's doing mediocre work, but I'm not necessarily an advocate for all the content, but I'm definitely an advocate for anybody who is able to puncture through this industry and with their voice and make something happen, because it is not easy at all, you know?
Yeah.
That's all I got.
Yeah, my mentors are a lot of my peers, you know. I kind of always looked sideways and was like, how are you doing what you're doing? You know, and they were like, oh, I did this and I applied for this and I did whatever this, or I would like see someone's play or I'd see an actor, you know. I remember like, you know, being an undergrad at Country Repertory Theater with Dr. Lilly, who just passed a month or so ago. And I remember like auditioning for Chadwick Boseman's play when he just got out of school. And like the first thing I did was like read his resume and be like, yo, what's Bada? He's like, oh, it's a summer, you know. So for me, it's always been like people who are like a little older than me or just like doing it and be like, and literally I would just study the resume, be in there like, oh, what's that? Google it, that, you know, and look it up and like, and see what they did. And so they don't know me like that, but those people have always been you know, the people that I've always like looked at to be like, oh, what are you doing? I want to do that. Or I don't want to do that. I want to do something different. You know, and so like, cause there was no one who really like took me under their wing per se. But I think to Keith's point, like a lot of my mentors were just people that I nerded out on and was like, oh, I want to do what they do, but my spin.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm, you know, it's kind of the amalgamation of the two, you know, people who are my peers, who are my friends, who I can, you know, pick up the phone and call, you know, Keith being one of them, you know, I've bent his ear and, you know, lamented to him, you know, and there are others who are, you know, my peers and also my elders, you know, like I go and I sit with Abi Odun, you know, I pick up the phone and I call Sonia Sanchez and I just, you know, to soak up that wisdom. And then, you know, James Baldwin, his play, you know, Blues for Mr. Charlie just set me off like, oh, you could say that, you could do that, you know, right. So, you know, it's a combination, you know, so it's a combo.
Okay, good. You know, we actually have a little more time than I thought because we are timely Black people. Everyone's laughing at that. I know everyone's like, oh, okay. And before I get into this next question, I just want to say I have been really fortunate to know each person on this panel in a different way, in a different situation or different experience. And I can say the work that you do, the manner in which you all work, the work that you have, the legacy of inclusion that you have set forth and are continuing to do is so important, because a lot of times people getting into a new field, a new component of a field, oftentimes they're not welcomed. And it might not be conscious that people are kind of putting up barriers to you, but I can say that the manner in which you lead with your heart and your talent is indicative of the work you create. And I think people should be really mindful of how we embrace each other. Yeah. We come in. I think I just had to say that so that everyone could hear it and record it and talk about it later. Because it really is important. And that's how, like you said, Liza, you have mentors that you look at. Because you said you go sideways. You know, I met you via Keith years ago, and he's like, oh, come do this reading. I was like, absolutely. So I think this is how we also build community together. Right. Not being like, you know, I went here and I went to USC and you went to NYU. We can't work together. It's really important. So I just want to commend you on all of that you all have done. We have another question. That was my violin moment. Right. From J. Foster McKelvia. Do you think that once Black artists get into the room, because they will have a louder voice and more capital, do you think it's their responsibility to raise the standards? I'm presuming raise the standards of the work in the room, but that's the question that as it was written.
I would think yes. I think again, like the question, I mean, you know, it's really important to, as an artist, to know why you're even doing what you're doing. So whatever room you show up in is how you see the importance of your art and the urgency of your art. You know, I think if you are about, and most of the people that I sort of cluster with and my tribe are about not only our authenticity being represented, but also penetrating those spaces where we can then become so masterful that we then bring in our tribe and create our own sort of institutions. Like that's my sort of dream and that's my mission. And that is what I am doing literally. Whether or not I'm in rooms that are completely toxic, like my end game is like, pretty soon I'm going to be able to do this myself and I'm gonna bring my tribe and we're gonna do this together and we're not gonna need anything but just perhaps financial support. You know what I mean? And hopefully we have enough Black money that we can do it with Black money. But you know, that's a whole nother conversation about that.
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, whether, you know, when you talk about raising the standards, right, what does that mean? Does that mean speaking your truth and, you know, kind of going against the grain? You know, what does that mean? But I think when you're in those rooms, and it depends on, you know, the level of, you know, the stock that you bring, right? Are you in a space where you can, you know, voice your authentic voice and kind of push against, you know, without any repercussions? So there's going to be a toll. You're going to pay a toll either way. If you raise your voice and, you know, you may be green, you may be new, The toll is you may be fired, or you may not be asked to come back.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? If you don't raise your voice, the toll is your spirit pays the price. It's like, damn, I got to sit through this toxic environment, right? So you just got to choose what toll you want to pay and where you are in the game. So it's really kind of not I don't think it's one size fits all. It's really nuanced. How you come in the game, where are you, on the pecking order, right? And what toll are you willing to pay or not pay?
Yeah, and being aware of the power that you have and the power that you don't have, kind of what Lisa was saying, right? If you're a first-time staff writer on a major television show, sometimes you can scream all you want, but I mean, in any whatever that is, you're not going to really get your voice heard, really. And so you might have to be sneaky about it. You might have to sneak some truth in there and figure out if the goal is to get the truth in there, right? If the goal is not to be right and have your ego in there, and the goal is to get the truth, then you got to maybe change your tactics, right? In the theater world, I think as a playwright, I think we do forget that we are powerful, that as a playwright, you are they cannot do your play without you. They really can't. And so there are a lot of first-time writers who are coming in because they come out of school and what have you, and they don't know people that they're submitting their power so early just because they're so grateful to be there. And so you just have to also be aware that, there's sometimes where you are the most powerful person in the room and exert your power, and sometimes they're not. And you got to sort of sneak the truth in there and just know where you're at.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I would just also add, as far as the writers' rooms in particular, or even film, when you're pitching film, that to understand that you're out in this industry, meaning Hollywood industry, to sell story and not tell story. Right? So there is a certain different type of behavior, expectation, language that is being used. And a lot of times I think first timers come into those spaces wanting to tell story and authentically and be very passionate about those things. And I think that's important and real, but also to understand that at the end of the day, you're really there to sell the story. Mm-hmm. So just sort of arming yourself with those skills and those tools that allow you to tell your story, but with the face of selling the story, if that makes any sense at all. Yeah. But it does it's a different kind of muscle and a different kind of sensibility, emotional sensibility.
I think that's an invaluable bit of information and advice to any creative who is, entering or involved in the industry. I think that's really important, something that is really vital and useful. Thank you for that. So we have about 5 minutes left. So take we have 6 minutes left. So take 2 minutes each. And this question is just simply, if anything, if there's something you've seen that you really liked and why, right? Excluding your own creativity, your own productions, what about it that you really like? I won't say if there's something you didn't like, unless you want to share that as well, but something that you like, whether it's theatrical or TV or film, and what about it captured your interest and maybe pulled on your heartstrings? Take about 2 minutes each. Curveball.
I loved I May Destroy You.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say
that. That seems like first generation. It's that's my aesthetic. It was so singular and so economic, and it made me want to quit writing. So I was like, well, you covered everything I've ever wanted to do that I didn't know I wanted to do. I don't know how I'm going to be able to do anything that good. But no, but because it was so honest and real, and it took on a subject in so many different ways, and actually changed a conversation that I was having with a bunch of people, not just people who looked like me, but everybody was having this conversation about sex and consent. And she really took this universal thing and put it in her specific language, which is just the dream, essentially.
Yeah, all of what you said, Ngozi, that show wore me out. But what I loved about her voice was how she navigates between drama and humor, the dramedy, which is my aesthetic. I was like, ooh, that's my sugar honey iced tea. You know what I mean? Like that I really marveled at how she just was so flawless with it. And it was ha ha ha, ooh, punch you in the face, ha ha ha, ooh, punch you in the gut. And which pulled you in and really spoke to a deep humanity of that really dark issue, but she made it she didn't make it light, but there were light moments. I would also say for me, I love what Misha Green did on Lovecraft and Watchmen. There's something that with taking the historical and making it horror, and talking about Tulsa, and I call it science faction. When they took like something factual and made it like it took it into like this super Afro ancient futuristic component, just blew my mind. And I mean that's definitely my aesthetic too, so it inspired me to just keep doing what I'm doing and just know that there are spaces for these kind of voices that are punching through with high levels of excellence.
Yeah. There are two things that come to mind. One is this indie film called Residue that is actually on Netflix right now. Written by, and I can't think of the name of the filmmaker, but he is the filmmaker is the son of
Garima.
Yeah, right. Yes, thank you. The son of the man who wrote Sankofa. Right. And so that film is a must see. And for me, like it really explores and puts its foot in Black male vulnerability. I've never seen a film that expresses Black male vulnerability the way that film did, and unapologetically, like camera going in on the heart of Black young men, just sort of navigating life in a very complicated transitional community in DC. The honesty of it, the beauty of the filmmaking. I know the filmmaker said in a few occasions that he ran out of time and ran out of money, and so a lot of things you're seeing is just sort of like last minute sort of curating. But even with that, I think it's definitely a beautiful film, just about DC in particular, about gentrification and also about the expendability of Black boys, and also the impact it has on Black parenting. It's a really beautiful film, very beautiful film, very inventive. The other piece, I got to shout out my girl Rada Blank for 30-year-old version. That film, white man with a Black woman's butt. I mean, that thing is so good. And I'm just so proud of her for being unapologetic about her experience. Like, it's not autobiographical per se, but there's a lot of autobiography in it about her experience as a Black theater maker in New York City, a Black woman in particular, and what that looks like and what that means and what she's up against and what you're up against. One of my favorite scenes, and if anyone hasn't seen this, it's a spoiler, when one of the white producers is basically saying that she should write like a Harriet Tubman musical or something, and she like looks around and just chokes back. Because I think all of us we've all been in that place, like, I just want to slap you down. Like, are you for real? But yeah, so I think that film is definitely a must see as well, as far as like us as Black artists in this, whether or not TV, film, visual arts, or whatever it is. Like, it's an honest, fun, loving, has some romance, it's kind of beautiful.
Nice. Well, I think that we have come up against it. It has been so informative, such a pleasure to share time and space and hear all of your thoughts and hear your just excellent experiences as content creators, producers, creatives, Black people that I know and love. I'm gonna pass it over to Kel, but it's been my pleasure. I look forward to seeing all of y'all soon in rooms, over food, over drinks, and catching up. Thank you.
Yes.
Hey, Kel.
All right.
Absolutely. Excellent, guys. Excellent job, man. For those tuning in, this was the Playwright and Screenwriter as an Activist Roundtable. I just want to handle some housekeeping once again before we clock out. We want to make sure that we support our vendors at our e-marketplace, Sisters Uptown and Just Us Books bookstores in the lobby on the Event Titans website, as well as the Center for Black Literature website. We also want to make sure that everybody picks up a commemorative program journal on the Center for Black Literature website under the National Black Writers Conference tab in the menu bar. Please fill out the evaluation that's popping up at the end of this session. Some of you may see it. And be mindful that our donor button is on the Event Titans page, as well as the Center for Black Literature website. As stated again, for me personally, very informative panel. edutainment at its finest. Most people who just, you know, go to the movies as a hobby and for dates, you know, it's awesome to kind of look under the hood and really get the analytics and what goes into it specifically by way of the Black experience. So I just want to thank you for tuning in. And for those of us who will be joining us at 4:15 for our roundtable on Black theater and film, looking back and moving forward, we will see you then. Thanks again for joining us at the 15th Annual National Black Writers Conference, and we'll see you at 4:15. Thanks again, guys.
Hey.
Thanks for having us.